Hello and welcome. Tonight we are going to be reading ghost stories. Well, actually we are going to be reading stories about disembodied hands. Let me explain. I was doing my regular reading on one of my favorite websites for first-hand paranormal experiences. If you're familiar with this series, then you'll know that the website I'm referring to is Your Ghost Stories. I've been reading, enjoying, and collecting stories from this website for years. I like to find the strangest and most interesting stories told there and read them for you here on my channel. I'm combing through the archives all the time, and the other night, as I was doing so, I found a story that I found interesting enough to save. I keep a document with all the stories I want to read for you, with links and little ideas on how I should categorize them. As I was adding this story to my documents, which is called The White Hand, I glanced over the list to make sure I hadn't already saved it. It was then I noticed that I had saved, not the same story, but another story recently that had the word hand in the title. I thought that was interesting, so I decided to search the Your Ghost Stories website and see if I could find any other stories with hand in the title. And boy, did I. Not only do all these stories have the word hand in the title, they all concerned disembodied hands, meaning hands that are not attached to a body, a free-floating hand, like the Thing from the Addams Family. And not only did I find a large number of disembodied hand stories, but half of the stories have comments, too, of other people sharing their own experiences of hands. You all might not think that this is as interesting as I am making it out to be, but I think as we go along, you will. Because who knew that seeing disembodied hands was such a common experience? It's so strange, and that's what I love about it. I also found several urban legends and folktales concerning hands, and I'll be weaving those in throughout the episode as well. We have a lot to get through, so let's get started. We'll begin with the story that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the one that started it all. It takes place in Nepal and is written by user Sagun B. It's called The White Hand. This incident took place when I was around 6 years old. I was at my uncle's home. It was the place I loved being at during my holidays. I had two brothers there and we really got along well. This time when I got there, my uncle had bought a new motorcycle. Seeing a shiny new bike as a kid made me think of how I wanted one for myself when I grew up. My brothers and I requested our uncle to take us on a ride. Eventually, he agreed. So, at around 5 p.m., we went out for a ride. We were very excited. One of my brothers went to sit on the fuel tank. Uncle was driving, I was behind him, and behind me was the other brother. 4 people on a single bike sounds like a lot, but we were little back then and didn't take up much space. Then, after each one of us was seated properly and promised to hold on with a tight grip, the bike started, and we waved to everyone gleefully as we took off. Finally, our wish was fulfilled. We were enjoying the ride very much. The roads weren't particularly good at those times, but Uncle was a good driver. We were laughing at occasional bumps from the road, having a great time. We were looking left and right, not wanting to miss anything. That's when I saw what I saw. We had come quite a distance now. The houses were getting fewer and farther between, until there were no houses. Just tall trees on both sides, and a small river passing between the road and the dense forest on the left. It wasn't dark yet, so what I saw wasn't something imagination could do. I saw it. I'm getting goosebumps as I remember it. A pale, nearly white hand cut just below the wrist, with really long nails and blood-red nail polish, lay on the bank of the river. It was so pale I could see it from afar, and I kept my eyes focused on it so that I wouldn't miss it when we drove past it. We were right beside the severed hand when it began to move. First slowly, then it started to run. I had my eyes on it the whole time. After it covered a small distance, the hand stopped and disappeared. I know it's funny to imagine a hand running on its own, but it really did happen. I'm sure of what I saw that day, but I still cannot figure something out. If anyone saw something as creepy as what I saw, wouldn't they tell other people around them to look at it, just to make sure? But I was completely silent throughout. This really bothers me. Maybe I just couldn't speak after what I saw. It's been 15 years since that incident. I clearly remember everything, but still cannot answer why I didn't show my uncle and brothers that thing then and there, why I couldn't speak a word. It would have been easier to answer if I was so scared that no words came out of my mouth, but I was incredibly calm now that I think of it. It's only the times that I rethink what I saw that creeps me out. I've asked them many times if they somehow saw what I saw, but no one except me did. I know people will have a hard time believing such an incident from a 6-year-old kid, but if only I could replay what I saw that day, I'm sure you'd believe it too. I don't think I'll forget this in my lifetime. That hand really does sound like the thing from the Addams Family. Don't you think that's an interesting experience? Forget seeing a ghost. Imagine seeing a severed, pale white hand. Why would that happen? What does it mean? Well, while we are at it, let's hear another story before we get into some of the additional topics I want to cover. This one is by user Rhythm Snail in Australia, and it's called Strange Hand at the Window. Both my sister and I were chatting together in the kitchen one afternoon. It was New Year's Eve. I was washing up the dishes from lunch earlier when she froze and pointed at the window and said, "Oh my God, what's that?" I turned and saw a pale, yellowish hand with very long, almost alien-like fingers at the corner of the kitchen window. Its fingers were moving slowly and fluidly, as if beckoning us to come outside. It was not attached to an arm. Both of us were terrified, and I immediately went to the back door to check if someone was trying to play a trick on us. I didn't see anything, but one of my cats bolted inside, clearly frightened of something. I closed the back door firmly and went back into the kitchen. Not long afterwards, the back door opened on its own again with a creaky noise, and my sister and I freaked out. I rushed to close it again. If someone was playing tricks, we would have heard them run off along the concrete outside our back door, where they would have had to have been standing in order to position the hand where it was seen. I'm sorry if this is a bit confusing to follow, but cutting to the point. Both of us had seen it, so I know I wasn't hallucinating. It looked solid, yet at the same time, otherworldly. I wondered what it was trying to tell us. I know what I saw, and the fact that my sister saw it too strengthens my belief that something was trying to grab our attention. Both this story and the first one were very spooky and unsettling in their own way. It's something to do with the outright strangeness of it, to just cast a glance and see this starkly colored, disembodied, yet animated hand. If you thought 2 stories of this nature were bizarre, we're just getting started. The comments under this story provide even more accounts. Commenter Dave Odd says, I found this site by typing the words "spirit hands" at the window in the search engine. I thought I might be the only one who has ever seen hands at my window. Many years ago, when I was only about 2, I can remember that one night at my grandparents' house, I saw what looked like 2 very large hands with very large fingers outside the bedroom window. They seemed to be getting closer to the window and larger. They were moving fast and did not look totally solid. They almost had a sort of bloody look to them. They did not look friendly. I have always wondered what it was that I had seen. Both my mother and my grandmother had years later verified seeing exactly the same thing that I had at the same time that I did. This only happened that one time. Nobody had ever seen the hands again after that one night. I am not sure what to make of what I had seen. Okay, allow me to go off topic for one moment because there was a particular comment that had a special significance to me. Vanessa commented, "What you say reminds me of a friend many years ago. She told me one day her sister heard a baby crying outside the house the previous night. I was appalled that her sister didn't go outside to help the baby. She explained to me that it is how bad spirits fool you to get you to go outside, and that her sister often heard the crying." The reason I wanted to point out this comment is that I did a video on crying babies. I don't read any actual ghost stories in it, but I do go over different folklore and legends relating to crying babies. I talk about an urban legend about hearing crying babies outside your window at night. Check it out if you're interested. It was at this point, after reading these 2 tales from your ghost stories, that I knew I needed to start researching different topics relating to disembodied hands, such as potential occurrences in folklore, which I did find. But before I got to that, I found an article on a website called Halloween Love, where author Jen penned a post titled, "I Saw Hands, the Disembodied Hands Phenomenon." Right off the bat, she relays a personal experience of seeing, you guessed it, disembodied hands. I'll read it for you now. There's no greater freedom for a wily 14-year-old than having the house to yourself. It was 2004, and the sun had just set on a long, tired Saturday in Tennessee. My parents escaped into the night to gamble away their money, leaving the house to me and the cats. I was often home alone, but I relished the solitude very much. Here I was, the master of my small ranch house domain, and no one could dictate how much soda I drank or how long I was on the computer. And how I did love that monstrous computer. Even by early millennial standards, it was a bit of a dinosaur. Giant, bulbous monitor, keys loud like galloping horses, and a pair of offensively big and awkward speakers, all perched on an unreliable desk shoved against the wall. I had just relocated the PC from one wall to the opposite. Originally, the way it was positioned, anyone could walk in and see whatever I was perusing on my monitor. Although I was a considerably innocent young lady, I didn't care for that antagonistic stare over my shoulder. Now, my PC sat where no one could see it unless privileged and invited, to some extent. I was getting used to the new setup, feeling smart and adult by my decisiveness, but there was a wrongness to it. I'm getting used to it, I thought. At my right shoulder, the bedroom doorway was open to blackness, the end of the hall. Take a left turn out that doorway, and the hall continued to the living room and kitchen. Weird, that's exactly how my computer room was set up in my childhood home. Anyway, have you ever felt watched? For the first time in my house, I did. I was excited, that's all. Lots of things excited me. Horror movies and all the fantastic things that hide in the dark were in my blood. Caffeine was in my blood, too. In a spree of Pepsi and good humor, I would dash down the hallway to the cold glow of the kitchen light, snatch up a bag of chips and another soda, and bound back to my bedroom, laughing to myself. When one Pepsi was consumed and nary a chip was left, I would race down the hall for another. Our kitchen was a galley kitchen, so I could race through one side and out the other, barely stopping to slide on the tile as I avoided the short stop to the carpet. Then, back up the hall, I ran like a racehorse in the final furlong. I was doing it again, down the hall, through the living room, skating into the kitchen. Then, everything froze, and my stomach sparked with nausea. I saw it. I saw hands. I saw a pair of white hands wrapped around and gripping the pantry door. And when I entered the kitchen, they slipped between the wall and the pantry as if someone was hiding there. The pantry door was no more than 1.5 feet wide, and the space between the wall and the door was no bigger than 6 inches. I knew, in all my logical mind, that no one was there. I knew no person could be that thin, that conniving, that impossibly wraith-like to be behind that door. It took everything in me to take a breath, walk to the pantry door, and close it. I knew what I saw. I knew the hands were really there. I knew I had felt something watching me. I walked quietly back to my bedroom and locked myself in for the night. I didn't want to think about the hands. I blamed the caffeine. My brain must have been going wild, and in a momentary lapse of reality, I saw something that wasn't there. That was enough to explain it away. but it still ruined the loveliness of Lonesome for me for quite some time. Last October, I returned to my hometown for my sister's wedding. My sister staggered out of the bedroom on high heels, swinging the hem of her wedding dress around as she tried to get traction on the new hardwood floors. I remember when I saw those hands right there. She laughed, gesturing to a corner in the foyer. Do you think this house is haunted? So, in the end, her sister had seen them too. Jen goes on in her article to explain her self-proclaimed phenomena of disembodied hands. Similar to the Hat Man or Black-Eyed Kids, she had been seeing personal accounts of eerie hands cropping up all over the internet, although this theme hadn't caught on the same popularity and cultural relevance that the aforementioned paranormal topics had. She includes excerpts of accounts from Reddit and even from Your Ghost Stories, which is a story we will be reading a bit later. In her comment section, several people drop their experiences with the phenomenon. Here's one of them. I had an experience with disembodied hands when I was 3 or 4. I used to sleep on a bunk bed with my younger brother. I remember being asleep when suddenly a noise woke me up. I looked down at my side and there it was, a pink hand. I know I was awake because I started scooting away from the hand as it inched closer to me. Eventually, I got the nerve to get up and climb down the ladder to my bed and run to my parents' room. I always called it the bubblegum hand and complained about being scared of it years later. Disembodied hands come in all colors, don't they? So far we have white, yellow, pink. Why not add another color to our creepy rainbow? This story is from Texas, written by Jeannie, and it's called Black Hand. Years ago, for Christmas, I had asked Santa Claus for a pair of little girl high heel shoes. It was all the rage. I was so excited I couldn't wait for Christmas. Finally, Christmas Eve was here. That night I could hardly sleep, but I knew I had to or Santa wouldn't come to our house. Morning came at last. I jumped out of bed and ran to our Christmas tree. Santa brought me the most beautiful pink plastic high heels anyone has ever seen. I put them on my feet and started parading around the room. I was so happy. My mom had gone to the kitchen to start breakfast. I decided to walk to the kitchen so my mom could bask in the loveliness of my shoes. Just as I get to the doorway to the kitchen, I notice this black arm that comes out of the doorframe. I'm walking very fast, so I can't really stop, and I walk straight through the black arm that is stretched out across the doorway. I'm so scared I stumble and fall, breaking the heel of one of my new shoes. I'm scared and crying. I cry not just because I've broken my shoes, but what was that thing I had just seen? I tell my mother about it, but she has no idea what to say. The horrific experience fades away with the years, and several Christmases come and go. But what's even stranger is that I see this black arm once more. This time, I'm about 12 years old. My brother, sister, and I are laying on a blanket under a lovely shade tree. All of a sudden, the black arm reaches up from the ground and comes around me. I scream and get away from it quickly. These two incidents happened to me years ago, but I remember them as if they happened yesterday. I don't know what this was or if anyone else has ever seen this black arm. All I know is that it happened to me. So this is interesting. Even though the story is titled Black Hand, it was actually just a disembodied arm with no hand. She confirms this in the comments. She says, I had the feeling this arm was not a good thing. It was dark, big, and scary. I don't remember seeing a hand or hair on it. And even in this strange sighting, Jeannie is not alone. 2 other people in the comments report having seen a disembodied arm. Spocky says, did the arm have a hand? I'm asking because when I was a small child, maybe 4 years old or so, I was sleeping in the bed with my grandmother when I saw an arm without a hand slide down from the big iron headboard in between her pillow and mine. It was an incredibly long arm. I sat up and looked at it. Then I took my pinky finger and pushed it back up through the headboard, and I saw it withdraw down toward the floor. I never saw it again. Strange, but true. Strange indeed. Well, I don't know about disembodied arms, but disembodied hands make several appearances in folklore. 2 examples occur in Japanese folklore, one of which is called Menekete no Yore. It appears most often in the middle of the night when people are making a trip to the bathroom. As you walk down the hall, a white hand extends from a doorway or a wall and beckons you into a room. If you dare to enter the room, you'll find that no one is there. This ghost, or yare, which is a Japanese classification of spirit that is unable to move on from spiritual purgatory to a peaceful afterlife unless you complete a task to help them. These hands are not beckoning to lure one into a dark room to cause any sort of harm. They are merely seeking acknowledgement, and if you pray for the spirit's rest or place a note of written prayer in their hand, then they may move on and won't appear again. That would be interesting if this practice was applied to the hands in our stories, although everyone who experiences an encounter with a disembodied hand tends to feel a strong negativity tied to the event, understandably so. Bringing up the second hand from Japanese folklore, we must add yet another color to our disembodied hand rainbow. This hand, called akateko, translates to red child's hand, and it appears as simply that, a red child-sized disembodied hand that hangs from a particular type of tree called Japanese honey locust trees. I've actually seen these trees at a local park near me. The akateko are known to simply drop down on people who pass underneath the trees, but they don't really do any harm. Besides, scare the shit out of you. I noticed while looking at photos of the honey locust trees that they have these long, tenderly red seed pods that hang from the branches. Maybe this is what people are mistaking for little hands? Who knows? Let's read another story. It's from user I'm Smiley in Wisconsin, and it's called The Hand Under the Bed. Growing up, I was always a chicken when it came to scary stories. I was probably in 5th grade when I experienced this. It was a long time ago. I remember it was a Sunday evening when my oldest sister's boyfriend came over. After watching a movie, my siblings and I all gathered together with my oldest sister and her boyfriend as he told us ghost stories. As the stories got deeper and scarier, I began to cry because I was too scared. That following Monday morning, my 2 oldest sisters, me, and my younger brother got up to get ready to go to school. I had 2 younger sisters who weren't in school yet. In our house that we were currently living in, our bedrooms were all upstairs on the 2nd floor, while the kitchen and living room was downstairs. Right before my oldest sister was going to head out for school, she'd asked me to go upstairs to her room to go grab her jacket that she'd forgotten. Without hesitating, I did as I was told. My sister's room was very well organized, since she was the only one out of all our siblings to have her own room. Her twin-size bed was centered in the middle of the room against a wall, and her bed sheets were nicely fixed. As I began to look around for her jacket, which was hung onto the back of her chair, that's when I saw it. I saw an arm, just from the elbow down to the hands, slip out from under the bed. The hand did a half-circle slide on the ground as it went back under the bed. At the moment, I thought it was my 2 younger sisters, who might have woken up early and decided to play in my older sister's room. I walked around the bed to the other side, bent down, and lifted up the bed sheets to discover nobody under the bed. At that instant, I felt shivers throughout my whole body as the hair from the back of my head raised. I ran crying out of her room back downstairs to tell the rest of my siblings what had just happened. Until this day, I can still remember the image of the hand sliding out from under the bed. It might have just been a quick 5 seconds, but those 5 seconds still scare me even now when I think about it. I don't know what might have triggered me to see that arm, but I tend to tell myself that it was just my imagination playing with me because of all the ghost stories I had heard the night before. But I know for a fact that this really happened, and it was not my imagination. Has anything like this ever happened to anyone before? You guys know the answer to that question by now, and the author gets lots of validation in the comments through other people's experiences. R.K. Patton says, "When I was about a 6-year-old girl visiting my grandma, she, my older sister, and myself were on the bed, and a hand reached out from under the bed. I know it was real because my grandma and older sister also saw it." This is something every child fears, something lurking under your bed. A hand darting out as you prepare to climb in bed for sleep, or as you dangle your feet off of the side. There's a legend in Latin American cultures, particularly popular in Mexico and Colombia, that plays on this very fear. Ever wonder how those supposed monsters get to be under your bed in the first place? According to stories in Colombian culture, there's a portal to the underworld under your bed. And it is through this portal which La Mano Peluda, or the hairy hand, reaches forth to grab you. The hairy hand appears as a large, twice the size of the average adult hand, hairy hand with black, rotted skin, with maggots writhing underneath, long fingernails, and blood trailing from the stump of the wrist. It's advised for children not to get out of bed at night, as the hairy hand can grab you and drag you underneath. But they've also been said to reach from windows, vents, and even through walls. Allow me to read a few more comments from the last story we read before we finish up for the night. Commenter CDs writes, "I was very young when I had something like this happen. It still bothers me to this day. I was laying in bed but unable to sleep and playing with a bell. My headboard was more like prison bars, so I had my arms hanging through them, just ringing my bell, when something reached up and grabbed it from me. I've never forgotten the long fingers and nails. I looked for my bell and never found it. That incident is still stuck in my mind." A user named Schlane says, "I also had an experience like that a few months ago, except I saw the hand, which was also from elbow to hand, kind of swing towards me from around a corner of a wall, and it was as high as my head. I got a fright, blinked, and it was gone. I thought I was going to be smacked in the face. Wonder what the connection is since a few of us saw it." I wonder too, Schlane. Why are there so many stories about people seeing disembodied hands, and why am I just hearing about it? I became absolutely fascinated when I discovered how popular these experiences are. Let me know if you enjoyed them too, because I could easily do a part 2. But for now, I'll call it a night. If you are one of the many people who has seen one of these bizarre severed hands, do let me know. And if you haven't, well, it could happen anytime, anywhere. Until next time.